All right. So, stippling photos. We're going to take the photos that we took last week. I'm going to show you how to access the L drive, copy your photo to your computer, um, do a little cropping and resizing, and a few little minor tweaks to the image so that we can set it up ideally for stippling. First thing you're going to need to do is get the photo. That's going to be in the student lessons drive, all right, or just lessons, called the L drive for short. Now, on my computer, I have a little icon down here at the bottom of my screen. It's this little manila folder icon. See student lessons. So that's how I access it. Yours might be a little different. Um, you could also probably open up a folder like this and look at it on the side. Like if you go to this PC, for example, and it's going to show you all of your um, drives and things on your computer. Go down to network locations, student lessons right here. If you don't see this for some reason, it's not listed, what that means is you're going to have to run your login script, and I'll show you what the login script is. All right. Um, Let me minimize this and I'll show you my really messy desktop here. Up here, you guys should all have this folder somewhere on your computer. It should be on your desktop. It's called CGHS Tools. If your L drive does not display correctly, and by that I mean if it doesn't show um, all of these teacher names, like folders of teacher names in them, that's what you should see. If you don't see that, you just got to refresh your network connection. So to do that, you simply go to CGHS Tools, go to Login Script right here, double click it, hit Run. It'll bring up a box with a bunch of scrolling code. It's just going to run that process. It takes 30 seconds or less. Just let it do its thing. Don't click on anything or interfere with it. Don't minimize it. And once it's finished, if you retry the L drive, it should display correctly. All right, it's just sort of checking to make sure drivers are installed, that sort of thing. All right, so CGHS Tools login script. Let's try again. Let's go back and look. There we are, student lessons. Scroll down and look for my name. It's alphabetical. So under the K's, I'm right here. Double click. Go to 2020 Stipple Portrait Photos. Go to period 5. There you are. There's all the photos we took on Friday. Now, more than likely, when you guys look at it, it's going to look like this. It'll just look like a list of files, and you can't tell one from the other. So in order to fix that, if you go up to View, it'll probably be set to Home or something. If you go to View and select, large icons or medium icons, whatever, large is better, then you can actually see whose is whose. Okay. Now, these are the kind of master copies of these files in the L drive. All right. I want these to stay intact. So the first step that you're going to want to do is actually make copies of these versions and copy them to your computer. All right. You don't want to override these files. You want to leave these as is, as backups, just in case something, like if you make a mistake, if something gets deleted accidentally, or you really screw up your photo and you need to start over from scratch, you can come back to the L drive, get another version of this, and you're good to go. All right. Getting in the habit of making copies and backups of your digital files is really, really important. And whether it's in art or whether you have like a paper that you've written, you always want to make copies and backups of everything that you do. and save it to different sources. So like have a version on your desktop, have another version saved to a USB drive, have another version that you email to yourself and attach it to an email. So that way if you misplace one or something horrible happens, your computer melts down and bursts into flames, you've got another copy somewhere. Okay. So let's choose one of these files. Let's say um, we'll do this one here. Okay. I'm going to copy this over. I'm going to right click and hit copy. And that's copy to the clipboard. Now I'm going to go over here to my computer and, you know, forgive my messy desktop here. It's pretty packed. But earlier this morning, I made a folder. Okay. So just right click, make a new folder. And once you open that folder, right click again and hit paste. And it will paste right. Oops. Oh, Vivi. Hold on a second. So now I have my image on my computer. Now this is the file that I want to alter and use, work from. Okay. Next, you're going to open this up in Photoshop. Multiple ways to do that. Number one, you can right click on this and go open with, and then select Photoshop. That's probably the easiest way to do it. So just right click on the image, hit open with, and find Photoshop. You might also, like in my case, I have Photoshop installed on my taskbar at the bottom of the screen, like right here. I could do it that way. Or you can, always go to your start menu, your Windows menu, and just search in your apps for Adobe Photoshop under the A's. So either way, okay? So now here is my photo, and I'm going to want to do a few things to this. Step one, I want to resize this a little bit. If you ever want to see the size of an image in Photoshop, you go up to image, image size. That gives you the image dimensions as well as the resolution. Right now it's 13.333 by 20.053 inches. So those are like the print dimensions. If I were to print this out, that's how big it would be. Resolution is 300 dpi, dots per inch. That means that for every square inch of this photo, there are 300 pixels. That's about the bare minimum for a decent looking photo. I'm sure you guys have all seen a really low res photo up close and it looks all choppy and chunky and with jagged edges. Okay, we don't want that. So 300 dpi is a good size to have it at, which luckily these are already set to that because I set the camera that way. Now, here you see the width and the height, and you see this little bracket here? This says that the width and the height are locked together. So when you change one, it will automatically change the other as well. They're linked together. You don't ever want to change one without the other, without that bracket. You see how I switched that off? Now that means if I change one, the other one will stay the same and it'll look distorted. But I want these to stay locked together. So watch what happens to the height when I change the width. I'm going to change the width to 10 inches. See, that automatically put the height at about just over 15 inches, okay? So it changes them both to match each other proportionally. So I'll hit OK because that's pretty good. Now that didn't really change it much, but it did it enough to where we can work with it. Okay, now I want to crop this photo. There is a crop tool in Photoshop right here where I can select this and just click and drag and crop it. But I want it to be a specific size. So I find it easier to use the rectangular marquee, which is right here, the second tool down. Click on this. And up here, make sure under style, yours probably won't be set to, yours will probably be set to normal, which means that when I click and drag a selection, it kind of does like weird sizes, right? I want a specific size, so I'm going to change it to fixed size, and I'm going to change the width to 8 inches and the height to 10 inches. Mine's already set that way. Now, whenever I click inside, click once, and it automatically makes an 8 by 10 selection, okay? Because that's the size I want to do the drawing at, okay? Now, if I click outside that selection, it's going to just make a new selection in a different spot. If, however, I click inside and move my cursor, I can just reposition this. So you want to do it somewhere about there, where you've got like the head and the shoulders, basically. You don't really have a lot of dead space up top. You know, it's a pretty good framing. You know, everything's centered. Okay, you want something like this. All right. Now I can ignore the rest of this. I don't need to worry about it. So I'm going to go up to image and just hit crop like so, and boom. Now I have an 8 by 10. Let's double check it. Go to the image size. And sure enough, it is now exactly 8 by 10 inches, 300 DPI, which is precisely what we want. Okay? Hit Control D to deselect. So now, here is our image. By the way, if you want to make the window larger or smaller, hit Control Alt minus to make it smaller, Control Alt plus to make it bigger. Easy way to zoom in. To zoom in, you can use the zoom tool, which is right here, this little magnifying glass. All right. Now we just want to adjust a few things. We want to up the contrast a little bit. Let's zoom in a little bit here with our zoom tool. And you know, this is a pretty good photo. It's nice and crisp, but I want to go a little lighter with some of the light values. So I'm going to go up to image, go to adjustments, and I'm going to select levels. This is going to pull up what's called a histogram, which is just a visual kind of graph, a representational graph of all of the dark and light pixels in the image. If I click and drag on the white triangle here on the right, watch what happens to the image. See how it gets lighter? All right, and if I do it too much, it gets really washed out and it looks like you're looking into the sun, all right, which you don't want. Conversely, if I do the dark triangle on the left, it makes it darker, okay? So I want to punch up these brights a little bit, these lights, light values, light pixels. And usually I take it up to just before where it starts to really, the histogram really increases, right? Somewhere in there is good. The darks are probably about as dark as they're going to get. But you see how like as soon as like this thing that shoots straight up, right? There's no ramping up gradually. Like it goes straight up. So my darks are about as dark as they're going to get. My lights, I have a little more leeway, so I'm going to take it up to about there and just hit OK. Now if I do an undo of that, you can see the before and after. All right, it didn't change it much, but it gives me a little more range to play with for the lighter values, okay? Now you could also have done image adjustments. We'll go back to levels. You can do auto, and that will kind of let Photoshop decide for you what it thinks it needs, okay? And that's not horrible, but it's not really what I would want it to do. So I'm going to take it back to where I had it, which is, it's not far off, somewhere in there, okay? So that's that. Now we want to just do a little sharpening of the image. This is already pretty crisp, but look up here in the hair. I'm going to show, it's really visible here. All right. I'm going to show you what this does. Go to filter, go to sharpen, and go to unsharp mask. All right. Now I usually, and you have a little preview window here where you can go in and look at the image before it does it. You can zoom in, zoom out, whatever. I tend to look at the hair or the eyes for this because you can really tell the difference. Um, I try to keep the amount somewhere in the 80% range. You don't want to go too far with it because that's just too much, right? That's just kind of crazy. So keep it somewhere in the 85% range is good. Radius, you want to keep it, 5 or below, somewhere in there. All right. And just hit OK. I don't mess with threshold. Don't worry about threshold. Okay. Now let's do the before and after again. You can see the difference. See how it just gives the hair a little more definition and the eyes especially, right? Before, after. All right. It's more visible on my monitor than up there, but you don't want to overdo it, just a little bit. All right. So now let's zoom back out. All right, so now we've adjusted our levels and we've added a little bit of sharpness to this. Um, Now we want to basically um, put a grid on this because the grid's going to basically be what we transfer with. And we also want to add a filter that's going to help us see the edges of things. All right, actually we'll do that first. All right, so we want to create a new layer here. The easiest way to create a new layer is go up to the layer menu and go right here to where it says duplicate layer. If you don't already have this layers window open, it's very important that you do. So if you don't have it open, go to window and make sure layers is checked. It's also the F7 key. All right. Make sure you have that open. You'll see why in a minute. Now, again, you can go to layer and duplicate layer up there. It's also available here in the layer menu. This little button with the 3 lines, duplicate layer. Now watch what happens in this area when I do that. Hit OK. Boom. Now I've got, look at this, 2 versions of this layer, 2 identical copies. One of these we're going to leave alone, leave it as is. The other one we're going to put a filter on. Now, before we do that, I want you guys to make sure that down here, these are your foreground and background colors, these 2 little squares. Okay? Make sure that your foreground is black and your background is white, because it'll affect the way the filter works. If it's not set to that, simply double click on the squares. It'll open up your color picker. Make sure that black is selected. Hit OK. Then do the same, double click on the white and switch it to white. Okay. Then making sure that you have this background copy layer selected, because you can actually select between the 2. Make sure that this top one's selected. Go to filter, filter gallery. It's going to open up a whole bunch of different things. We are going to make sure that we have photocopy selected. This is stamp. Stamp works pretty well. You could actually use stamp as well if you wanted to. I think photocopy is a little better, but either way. And you have these little sliders over here on the right hand side, and they allow you to change the parameters of your filter and add more detail, less detail. We're going to go with photocopy. And you can change the darkness level, change the detail level. And what you're really looking for is something where it's allowing you to see, it's translating the edges of your image into lines. And that's helpful for when you're penciling. All right. So, you're going to have to play around with this a little bit. And you can zoom in and out of this um, as needed. Down here in the corner, you can actually zoom in and out. I don't want to hit that now because I'll probably accidentally pause the video. All right. And then just play around with the sliders, then hit OK when you think you've got something useful. Now watch what happens. All right. It looks weird, but if you really zoom in and look here, you see how a lot of these edges have been changed. And if you want to compare it to the original, see these little eye icons over here in the layers? It's like a little light switch, turn it off and on. So what I'm doing now is turning this layer off, and I'm seeing this layer underneath it, the background layer. So there's my original, and this is the new layer. So what I would do, the whole reason for doing this, is that I will use this to pencil from. I'll have this open as I'm sketching, and this will help me see some edges a little bit clearer, like especially in the eyes and the eyebrows. It's going to help me see the shapes of some of these elements a little bit better when I'm penciling. And then when I'm done sketching it out in pencil and I'm ready to start stippling, I simply turn this layer off, and then I stipple from this layer, okay? Because this is the layer that has all the values on it. All right, so do not stipple from this, because that's wrong. Only use this layer for penciling, the penciling stage. This is for the stippling stage. Does that make sense? And again, you could have used stamp or something else, but I think photocopy works pretty well. All right, so now we're ready for the grid. All right, we've got our image with our 2 layers in it. Everything's been cropped and tweaked. Adding a grid is really simple. You simply go to View, go to Show, and go to Grid. And there it is. Turn that off. Okay. Now, if you want to change the appearance of your grid, you can do it over up at the Edit menu. Go all the way down to Preferences, the very bottom, and go to Guides, Grid, and Slices. You click on that. That will bring up this window. Go to where it says Grid. Right now it's set to black, and I've got a grid line every 1 inch, and I've got 2 subdivisions. Let's change the subdivisions to 1. Let's change the color from black to, let's do yellow, just for the heck of it. And we'll keep it at 1 inch, and watch how it changes. Okay. Now, personally, I think a 1 inch by 1 inch grid works best for this. If you feel like you need bigger squares or smaller squares, I suppose you can change it up. I feel like having too many grid lines is distracting, and it's just more that you have to erase later. But I could see the argument for, like, especially here, like in the eyes, and you want some extra lines for guidance, where that would be helpful. So in that case, what I do is just go back to preferences again, go back to God's grid and slices, and you can change the amount. You can change the grid itself, but I think it's better to just add some subdivisions in there. Like, you can add as many as you want, but I think actually 2 is plenty. Hit OK. Now you see how there's little dotted subdivisions in between each square. So now you've got more lines to go in and measure off the location of where things should be. All right, I'm assuming you guys know how to use a grid to translate an image. I mean, like, I see little coloring activity books for kids that have like grid exercises in them where it's like, here's My Little Pony, and try to copy it, use the grid to copy the other half of, you know, Wonder Woman or My Little Pony or whatever. Like, it's pretty straightforward. You're just using the lines to help you draw locations for the edges. Okay. So that's basically all we're doing. Now, this yellow looks pretty good against this layer. Against this one, it's not so great, so you might want to choose a different color for the penciling part. But you know how to do that. Okay, and then when you're done, like if you only need the subdivisions for the eyes and you're finished with the eyes, just go back, change your subdivisions back to 1, and then you're back to where you were. I also find it helpful to have the rulers. See these little rulers on the sides and the top and the sides? It just helps to get the size down, be reminded of the size that you're working in. And to do that, go to View, go to Show. Oh no, actually it's right here, View Rulers. Make sure that's checked. See, if I uncheck it, they go away. Okay. Now, the one thing to say about this grid is that if you were to print this out for some reason, the grid would not show up right now. This grid only exists in Photoshop. If you want a printout of the photo with a grid on top of it, you're going to have to create a new layer, which is this button right here. Yeah, I got a third layer now. Or you could do it up here under Layer. See, New layer, either way. And you would have to literally like get either the line tool or get like the pencil tool, hold down Shift, and like trace over each line. And you want to do it on a separate layer so that it's not affecting your image. And you'd have to trace over each line horizontally and vertically. And it might take you a few minutes, but then you could print it out with the grid on it. But in all honesty, I used to do that with my students. I used to have them always have a printout. But it's really just as good or better to just have your computer open while you're working, because this way you can zoom in really close. You can do Control Alt plus or minus, zoom in really close to your grid and like be as specific as possible and not have to worry about, you can't zoom in on a piece of paper unless you have a magnifying glass. All right. But, if you forget your laptop or your laptop's not charged or something else like, whatever, power goes out, then of course having a printout is handy. So I'll leave that up to you whether or not you want to print it out. All right. But this is it. And then once you have all of these layers and all of these steps finished, then you simply go to File. You can do Save or Save As. Save As just saves it as a different version. You can just save this one as is and just name it whatever you want. I would name it your name and just make that the file name, and then hit save. And then now this PSD will be saved to your computer. And this is now your copy. And again, I would make backups of this file, so that way you don't mess it up. Because if you lose this, then you got to go back to the original, start all over again. So once you get to this point, back it up in a few places, and you're good to go. Then the next step after this is getting your sheet of drawing paper, gridding that, and starting to very, very faintly draw the grid and the portrait, the line drawing of the portrait on your paper. So I'm hoping to be done with all of these stages by end of this week, beginning of next, and then by early next week we could actually start stippling this. Okay. I'm going to give us like a couple of weeks of class time to get as much of this done as we can. It's going to definitely require you to take this home and work on it on a regular basis. You won't be able to finish if you're just doing it in class. Okay. But I will try to give you plenty of extra time to finish it, even once we have to move on. But I would say, in all honesty, if you can get like 2 squares done a day, 2 to 3 tops, you shouldn't have any problem finishing this in a couple of weeks. Right? Obviously, the more you do, the quicker it'll go. And not all squares are the same. Some squares are more time intensive than others, but I think 2 to 3 squares a day is a pretty good pace. Okay. And again, if you want to work on this square at a time, or if you want to work the whole image, that's up to you. All right. Any questions? Nope. Okay. Then that is it.